Monster, an original post-apocalyptic story. This story is a continuation of the A Survivor's Daily Routine series. Be sure to go back and listen to those first to understand the story up to this point. All follow the Wachowski family's survival in a post-apocalyptic world overrun by dinosaurs and all other prehistoric animals, all resurrected by an anomaly that science couldn't explain. Maeve didn't appear at breakfast the next morning, so Kalani left a plate of food at her daughter's door. Breakfast that morning was much quieter than dinner had been, and everyone seemed in a hurry to leave the table as quickly as possible. As Adam left the table, he whispered to Katrina, "Stay here today. Help your mother around the house. Keep an eye on your sister as well." She nodded and kissed his cheek as he left the kitchen. Adam was in the hallway, putting his hunting gear on, when Nolan found him. As Adam was getting his first boot on, Nolan said, "Hey Dad, I was thinking, how about I do the hunting today? Then you can go check your game camera and get an idea of what's in the area. We can knock out 2 birds with 1 stone that way and turn 2 days' worth of activity into 1. Adam regarded his son's suggestion for a moment and then nodded. He smiled and unslung his rifle, passing it to his son. "Be careful," he said, feeling proud at Nolan's offer to step up. Nolan took the gun. "I will, Dad," he assured, hugging his father. Adam handed his son his camouflage jacket and said, "Don't stray too far. Stay within a few miles of the house. And if you don't find anything after searching for a few miles, just come on back," he said. Walking out of the hall into the rack coats were hung on, grabbing his red vest and putting it on. Aren't you going to take a gun, Dad?" Nolan asked. Adam shook his head. "Game camera isn't too far away. I've never needed one for just going out there before. Why would I today?" he said. Nolan nodded. "Okay. See you later, Dad," he said, opening the door and walking outside, pulling it shut behind him. Adam followed a minute later after saying goodbye to Kalani, and then going outside onto the porch himself. He'd thought about trying to talk to Maeve, but decided to just let her be for a while yet. Some songbirds were singing in the tree line, nice and loud in the early morning, as were the insects, and the temperature was warmer than it had been the day before. Pulling his vest up a little more, he walked off the porch and toward the trees. He caught a glimpse of Nolan heading into the forest in the opposite direction, and silently wished him luck. "Good hunting. Bring home that whitetail," he thought. Kalani watched her husband and son both walk into the trees on opposite sides of the clearing, and then walked back towards the kitchen, seeing Maeve's plate was left untouched. She sighed and entered the kitchen, finding Katrina still sitting at the table. "Can you please wash the dishes?" she asked, feeling a little emotional suddenly as old worries again came back to her. Worries of her kids' safety. Katrina nodded, seeing the look on her mother's face, and went to the sink with the dirty plates, grabbing a jug of water off the counter to begin cleaning. Nolan had gone around a mile into the woods when he came to a more open space, almost a small meadow, though still dotted with a few scattered small trees. Nolan crouched down, examining some deer tracks he had just come across, ones that looked relatively fresh. He brushed some of the dirt and leaves aside and examined them closer. "It went straight that way, probably just before sunrise," Nolan said to himself, looking at the opposite side of the clearing. He decided to follow it and stood back up, crossing the open area, looking around in case the deer had decided to bed down somewhere nearby. As he was walking, his gaze on the tracks, he thought he saw something out of the corner of his eye and turned to look to his left. What he saw wasn't a deer. Standing just inside the trees, a few hundred feet away, completely still, was a large black bipedal theropod shape. It stood completely motionless, and Nolan couldn't make out what it was due to the distance and the leaves obscuring a clear view. But he still thought he was able to make out a few features of the thing, though he felt uneasy when looking at it, like there was an itch in the back of his head. He felt like he was being watched, that the shape in the trees was staring back at him, and the feeling only got worse the longer he stared back at it. After staring for several seconds, Nolan quickly swung his gun around, raised it, and fired at the shape. It didn't move, though Nolan was sure he had hit it. The scope on the gun was accurate, and Nolan had never missed a shot with the .22 before. Confused, thinking maybe it was just an oddly shaped tree, maybe blackened by a lightning strike, Nolan began walking forward, crossing the space to get a closer look. He was so focused on the unmoving shape he was approaching that he wasn't looking where he was putting his feet. He stepped on a large stick, which broke under his foot and sent him tumbling to the ground. He recovered quickly from the trip and got back onto his feet, picking up the dropped rifle as he did. The shadow in the trees was now gone. Keeping the gun partially raised, Nolan hurried to cross the remaining distance to the tree line he had seen the shape standing in. Cautiously, he moved into the trees and found, roughly 10 feet inside the tree line, a set of fresh footprints exactly beside the tree the shadow had been next to. Looking around to make sure the area was clear, Nolan crouched and examined them. The prints looked like Utah raptor footprints, but they were far too big to be from a Utah raptor. A Utah raptor stood as tall or slightly taller than most humans, though their feathers did sometimes make them look even bigger. But the animal that would have left the tracks Nolan had found on the forest floor would have had to have been at least 3 or 4 feet taller than any Utah raptor, at least. The prints also, while at a first glance, looked like Utah raptor footprints, close inspection revealed a subtle difference other than just size. Between each toe was an additional impressed outline in the dirt. They looked like the impressions one would see on prints left by birds with webbed feet. A shiver ran through Nolan as he realized by the size of the prints that the animal was likely around 10 or even 11 feet tall. Nolan suddenly felt very exposed and uneasy. He felt again like he was being watched. He stood up slowly, looking around, the forest expanding on all sides of him, suddenly feeling threatening, dangerous, ominous, and wrong. Nolan began backing up, rifle raised, tracking a deer, the last thing on his mind now. Still seeing nothing, but still feeling like eyes were on him, Nolan threw caution to the wind and turned around and bolted, wanting nothing more than to get out of the forest that had now gone eerily silent. Crouched out of sight, lying on his belly, Version 2 watched as panic took over the boy and as he turned and ran away. If he wanted to, at that moment, he could have chased after and caught the kid in seconds. But Version 2 wasn't done having his fun yet. Scaring the family was enough enjoyment currently. He wasn't ready to kill them. Besides, he had also left something in the woods for Nolan to find. Kalani found the food untouched, but her daughter's door was now wide open. A quick search revealed Maeve wasn't in the house, so Kalani picked up the plate and took it to the kitchen. And she then went inside Maeve's room to tidy up the bed and anything else her daughter might have missed cleaning up the day before. She felt bad for what had happened and wanted to do something at least to make up for it. While straightening the blankets on the bed, Kalani's gaze went to the window her daughter had claimed the monster was at the night before. She walked over and examined the glass, finding no signs of any damage or any signs that something had tried to get in, which was comforting. Turning back to face the full bedroom, she then noticed something on the table by the head of Maeve's bed. Her sketchbook and the worn pencil lying nearby seemed to indicate that she had been drawing in it while locked up that morning. Wondering whether she could possibly find out what her daughter had been thinking, Kalani walked over and picked up the book, flipping it open. At first, there was nothing unusual, until she found the most recent drawings that were not done in Maeve's usual style, but rather they looked to have been hastily done. The first thing Kalani took notice of was the little stick figure of a little girl. There was a triangle depicting a dress, and though Maeve had never worn a dress a day in her life, There was also a bow tie in the girl's hair. The other thing in the drawing was a scribbled, spiked-covered monster with large, empty eyes. The rounded shape vaguely resembled a dinosaur, but it rather looked like it had come from a nightmare. Above it was written the word monster. Kalani flipped through the pages one by one, finding each one more and more disturbing as she went. The pictures scaled up in their depicted content as she flipped through the pages, becoming more and more horrific. At first, the girl and the monster were just standing around in a forest. Then in one, it was chasing her, and the girl was running away from it. In others, she was hiding from it behind a tree or crouched by a fallen log as the monster looked for her. In some, she was crying, and as the drawings went on, Kalani saw that the scribbled monster seemed to be getting closer and closer to the girl, and it seemed to be getting bigger in each drawing. And finally, in the last one, it was holding a sobbing stick figure above its open mouth. Huge, horrific teeth bared in a snarl. And the idea of what happened next was clear. The girl was eaten. Kalani just stared at the drawing, feeling uneasy and disturbed by them all. She flipped the sketchbook closed and set it back on the table, leaving the room and closing the door behind herself. She walked through the kitchen and opened the back door, calling out to Katrina, who was filling a basket with apples. "Have you seen your sister?" Katrina looked up at the house and shook her head. "No, she was still in her room when you told me to come out here and do this." "Well, bring back what you have. It'll do, and I'll pick more if we need them. I want you to go look around and try to find your sister," Kalani called. Katrina nodded, dropped the apple she was holding into the basket, and picked it up, carrying the basket towards the house. While Kalani waited for her on the porch, she looked around and said to herself, "Where is that child?" She noted that there were easily 100 places immediately around the cabin her youngest could have tucked herself away in if she wanted to hide, which it seemed like she definitely did. It was obvious that what had happened the night before had carried a bigger impact on Maeve than Adam and Kalani had thought. Maybe it was more serious than a simple night terror. Though perhaps there was one upside. That thing being described by Maeve was definitely not a Dinopithecus. Thank God. Kalani didn't know if she could handle facing one of those again. Especially since the memories from the attack from years prior were still seared vividly in her mind. Having to hold the door shut with all the strength between her and Adam and still feeling it opening. It finally being forced fully open. Adam yelling for her to duck, and her throwing herself to the floor as he fired several shots out the open door and into the shrieking troop, which had finally sent the one still alive running into the forest. That had been before they'd had kids, and Kalani wanted them to never experience something like it. She and Adam had never even told them it had happened. She wanted to believe there was nothing that was a threat to her children stalking around, but now she wasn't so sure. The only thing still giving her a sense of relief was that the thing Maeve described and drew didn't look like anything that actually existed. It was a relief she wanted to hold on to, but there was still the worry that something was indeed stalking the house and her family. She'd have to bring it up to Adam, though she played it off like nothing was wrong when Katrina passed her the basket of apples upon reaching the porch. "Things are no better at home," Maeve sobbed, leaning against Gamma's chest. He placed a reassuring arm around her midsection and looked at his pack. Bard and Streak also made eye contact with each other, and Bard asked, "What is it that even happened? You haven't exactly said." Maeve sniffed and rubbed her nose. "Last night, in the middle of the night, I woke up and I don't know why, and I noticed this shadow on my wall. So I looked at the window, and this thing was standing there with these glowing eyes and giant teeth. It was huge. It had its claws pressed up against the glass. It was looking right at me. Its eyes were just these wide open, glowing yellow circles. It was so wrong looking. It it looked like a monster. The raptors all looked at one another, their eyes widening. What happened next? Gamma asked, nudging Maeve on the cheek comfortingly with his snout. I screamed and my family came running in, and I told them what I saw. And today they acted like it was any other day, like nothing bad had happened. Maeve mumbled, her words becoming interrupted with fresh crying. She then looked up at the raptors and continued, What if it's been there on other nights? What if it's been staring at me through my window for months? It was the scariest thing I've ever seen. And my family didn't believe me. Not really. They believe I saw something, but not what I described. They just brushed it aside and told me to go back to sleep. And I couldn't sleep last night, obviously. Who could after that? So I just started drawing. I filled my whole sketchbook up with these horrible things that thing might do. You guys believe me, right? Of course we do, Streak assured. I mean that. He looked at Bard and whispered, What do we do? Do we let her go back? We can't keep her from her family. What do you think? Bard asked in a whisper as Gamma continued comforting Maeve. Streak chittered softly in response. With what happened at the lake, and now this, I think something is stalking her family. Something we might have missed when patrolling this area, he said, then added louder, Maeve, remember, use your signal if you ever need our help for anything. I really wish I'd rigged those fireworks up closer to home, Maeve sniffed. I just didn't want to risk my family finding them, because then I'd have to explain them. But now if I need them, they're so far away from the house. Streak shook his head. Your family isn't taking this seriously. I think the thing in your pond and what you saw last night are related. We're going to sleep at least a mile closer to your home tonight than we usually do, about halfway between here and the cave you have rigged up, so we can get there a lot faster if you need us. We don't want to get too close in case your father notices us. He might think we're what you saw and start shooting. I want to stay with you guys, Maeve sobbed. You take me seriously. Streak sighed. We can't do that. Your family would go all over creation to find you, and then they might run into whatever you saw. You go on home, but we will be ready to act if you need us. That's a promise. Gamma stood up. I'll take her back. I'll be sure to stop just out of sight of the house. Streak nodded. Okay. And we'll do a little looking around this afternoon and see if we can find anything, he said. Then he looked directly at Gamma. You be careful. I will, Gamma promised. Come on, kid, he said, lifting Maeve to her feet. Let me stay with you guys a little longer, please. I don't want to go back there yet, Maeve begged. Gamma looked at her and then at his packmates. Streak sighed. Okay, you can stay just a little longer, he said. Maeve flung herself against him and hugged him tightly. The raptor softly chattered and gently hugged Maeve back. After lying against him for a few minutes, the exhausted child passed out. Streak sighed and curled around her protectively, making sure she was warm while she caught up on some of the sleep she was certainly needing after a night of being awake and afraid. And right then, she obviously felt more at home with them than she did at that house. Adam reached the tree his solar rechargeable game camera was on without incident. With Nolan taking care of the hunting, it truly was a perfect opportunity to check it and see what was in the area. A modern-day, Jurassic era, forest mix was a perfect place for a great variety of wildlife to flourish. The pictures on the camera were never boring. Adam set his bag down and unhooked the camera from the tree, holding it up so he could see the small screen on it, and he began clicking through the pictures, checking the little clock in the bottom corner to see what time the animals pictured had moved through. The photos were pretty much what he expected. The first one showed Adam leaving the last time he had checked the camera a few days prior. There were various day and nighttime photos of deer, small dinosaurs, and a golden eagle, which was a surprise. There were occasional animals that Adam could sometimes not fully make out, like a blur that seemed to be some small flying, feather-covered dinosaur species. Another picture showed a fully grown Dimetrodon, a much more ancient animal than the often seen dinosaurs that hailed from the Permian era, a time long before the first humans or the first dinosaurs. It had passed through the area the previous day during the afternoon. There was a picture of a deer leaping past the camera, only for the next photo to show a blur chasing after it, likely a coelophysis, judging by the shape. It was too scrawny and featherless to be something of a similar size from the dromaeosaur family. There was nothing surprising about the photos. Deer were the most abundant animal, as expected. Also, as expected, was how far from the camera the deer were in varying shots. Some much further back than others, and there were some that had their noses right up at the lens. All showed them as relaxed and comfortable in the area, which was good. No noteworthy gems in this bunch. The most memorable... But then, Adam clicked to a photo taken shortly after 1 in the morning on the previous night. It showed a large, wide-open, glowing eye pressed right up against the camera lens, and it made Adam jump slightly in surprise. The picture unnerved him. Somehow, it almost seemed like it was staged by the animal. The eye seemed to be looking knowingly into the camera, with a wild and insane look to it. Adam finally made himself click to the next picture, unable to look at the eye any longer, and saw the following picture showed a spike-adorned tail vanishing into the brush as the animal walked away from the camera. Part of a foot, thigh, back hip, and haunches were also visible in the night vision photo. According to the clock, the follow-up photo had been taken 5 minutes after the original. Had the animal stared into the camera for 5 minutes? Adam clicked again to go to the next picture, but the one of the animal walking away was the last one the camera had taken. Adam looked around, spotting the brush the animal had passed when leaving, and wondered how far away it was now, and what it even was. Rather unnerved, Adam put the camera back on the tree, secured it tightly, and pulled out his walkie-talkie. Every time anyone left the house on their own, they were supposed to take one, and since they were solar chargeable, there was no need to worry about batteries failing at a bad time. Nolan? Nolan? Adam paused, lightly smacking his walkie-talkie. Nolan, something must be wrong with my walkie-talkie, because if you're responding, I can't hear you. If you can hear me, and you beat me home, get the other game cameras out of the hall closet, because I'm going to set them up this afternoon. Over and out. He assumed his son wasn't answering because he was hunting. Not unusual. Adam would do the same thing if he was hunting and someone called him and it wasn't a dire emergency, especially if he was close to making a kill. And they always kept conversations short, just in case of a scenario that someone undesirable might have been listening in on the frequency. So it was possible that Nolan just had decided not to respond. It wasn't concerning. There might have been a number of reasons. So, Adam just put his walkie-talkie back on his belt, made sure again that the camera was firmly fastened to the tree, grabbed his bag, and turned to walk back home. He walked back the way he had come at a quicker pace than he had on his trip to the camera. The homeward bound trip started just as uneventful as the original. But Adam became slowly aware of the sounds of something behind him. Not the persistent sounds of songbirds or woodpeckers, but of something big rummaging around and snarling nearby. Adam stopped and slowly turned around, scanning the trees and brush with wide but focused eyes. The rustling stopped, and nothing seemed out of place. Adam kept scanning his surroundings, and his eyes did eventually pick out something that didn't belong where it was. Adam froze and locked gazes, eyes meeting eyes, with a Carnotaurus. It was standing, or rather crouching, completely still, its eyes black and unblinking, its dark green, brown, and black warty skin helping it to blend in with the trees. Adam watched it, and it watched him. It had a thick, muscular neck and 2 horns on its head that gave the species away right away. It was somewhat like a bipedal, scariest carnivorous version of the Shringosaurus Adam had seen years prior, in what felt like another life. The Carnotaurus genus, which consisted of 1 species, was a strong, bipedal theropod dinosaur. And it was a carnivore. The tail on the individual, Adam could see, was long, and it had some of the shortest arms Adam had ever seen on any dinosaur. On its head, above its eyes, was the pair of horns, easily adding around another foot to its height. The animal stood between 10 and 11 feet tall, but was crouched low to the ground with its powerful but slender legs tucked against its body, and looked to be ready for a spring or a chase. There were no feathers to be seen on the animal. Adam didn't know how good the eyesight of the individual he was looking at was, but he wasn't worried about that. Carnotaurus had a good sense of smell that made up for any eyesight shortcomings, and it was a very fast runner. That was what Adam was worried about, since he knew he stood about as good a chance of outrunning a Carnotaurus long-term as he did outrunning the Utah raptor from a few days prior. Not breaking eye contact or blinking, Adam began to slowly back up away from the dinosaur. He walked backwards slowly, making sure the places he was planting his feet were even and had nothing to trip over. Fallen leaves crunched under his boots with each step backwards. The Carnotaurus didn't move, but it and Adam's unblinking gazes remained locked on one another. An uneven spot made Adam nearly fall, and forced him to look at where he was going for just a quick second. He only tore his gaze away from the Carnotaurus for a second as he regained his balance, but when he looked back up, it was several steps closer. In that short amount of time, it had silently closed half the distance between them, its long and uneven teeth now visible in a beam of sunlight that was shining through the leaves. Now that its prey was facing it again, the Carnotaurus didn't move, nor did it blink, and Adam kept his gaze on it, frozen as well. The horrifying thought hit Adam like a slap. It's actually hunting me, he realized. The thought was accompanied by the coldest chill he had ever felt. The Carnotaurus continued staring at Adam, snarling softly, its unblinking gaze unwavering. The only movement the dinosaur made was when it breathed in and out. Adam took a few deep breaths, thinking about his knowledge of the area, thinking over each detail of the forest. Like with the Utah raptor on the road, the Carnotaurus could not plan ahead, while Adam could, the one advantage he'd always had against the reborn prehistoric threats. As Adam thought about his knowledge of the area, he couldn't help but realize there was irony in the fact that this happened on the day he specifically mentioned he'd never needed a gun on the trip out to his camera. Not that a basic rifle would have done much good against such a large animal, though. Thinking about the area carefully, Adam knew there was a nearby rocky creek bed, and growing right on the edge of one of its steep banks, roots tumbling into the creek, was a thick tree that was hollow on the inside, its exterior exposed by a large open hole in its base. It was the only thing nearby that he could possibly hide in. Taking a few more deep breaths to compose himself, Adam turned and ran at full speed, throwing his bag and leaving it behind. The Carnotaurus roared and began chasing after Adam with heavy stomps, forcing its way through the trees, splintering piles of brush as it went. Adam didn't look back. He just ran, focusing on his destination. Not soon enough, the creek came into view. Thankfully, the tree wasn't on the opposite bank. Ignoring the deep growling that was right behind him, he ran to the tree he desired, dropped onto his knees, and climbed into the hole, squeezing through and shifting into a sitting position within the cramped interior. As he started to shove himself up into the inside of the trunk, he found the inside of the hollow tree, shortly above the open hole in the side, blocked by a coiled, thick, rusty metal cable. It was probably a leftover from a fence that had been built out there probably a century before. Any other day, it would not have mattered, but today, it was blocking his shimmying climb into safety. Adam just tucked himself on the ground inside, knees to his chest, and hoped the trunk would keep the Carnotaurus out, since he knew it wouldn't be able to get more than its nose in through the hole. The Carnotaurus arrived moments later, and there was a thunderous splintering as the dinosaur latched its jaws around the tree trunk several times over a period of only a few seconds, but the tree held up against the animal's weak bite force. The Carnotaurus let go, circling around the tree a few times before eyeing the hole. It snorted and lowered its head to the ground, trying to force its jaws inside of the tree, but the hole was too small, as Adam predicted it was. Inside the tree, he gagged as the dinosaur's breath washed over him. It snapped its jaws, but just couldn't reach inside of the hole, no matter what angle it attempted to try. The Carnotaurus stopped its attack and regarded the hole, sniffing its prey inside. Adam kept clenched into a tight ball, watching the dinosaur's head just outside. The Carnotaurus continued growling, trying to find a way to reach its prey, though the tree seemed to be doing a good job at confusing it. Then, from out of the dinosaur's mouth came its tongue. The thick, saliva-covered muscle slid inside of the tree, up Adam's cheek, and wrapped itself around his head. Adam gagged and pulled back as the dinosaur tasted him and tried to pull him closer, but the tongue was slippery and could not get a strong enough grip, and the dinosaur eventually pulled it back into its jaws. The Carnotaurus stood up outside and rammed into the tree trunk a few more times, but the tree was strong enough to keep it out. With a frustrated roar, it quickly turned and stalked off, its tail delivering one last slap on the trunk as it left. Adam sighed and leaned his head back. He waited until the sounds of the dinosaurs stomping away faded, and only then emerged from his safe spot. Deciding not to go back for his bag, he just turned right away to get back on the path for home and to his family. Maeve awoke, still gripped in the protective claws of her velociraptor friend. Streak gently nudged her on the cheek with his snout. "Feeling any better?" he asked gently. Maeve looked down, but nodded. "Are you ready to go back home? I'm sure your family's getting worried by now," he asked. Maeve nodded again. "Yeah, you're right," she replied. Streak smiled. "Good. Gamma, take her home, then come find us. We'll be staying closer to the cabin for the next few nights, like we said, in case they need us." Gamma nodded and got to his feet. "Okay, kid. Come on. Let's get you home to your family." He reached out and helped Maeve to her feet. She still looked exhausted, but perhaps a tad more rested. "Thanks," she said with a small nod. "See ya, kid. Hopefully you don't need us tonight," Bard said as Gamma gently steered Maeve in the direction of home. Streak sighed. Come on, then. Let's find a new place for the three of us to bed down tonight, he said, standing up as well. He didn't even get to take a single step before Maeve came suddenly running back, and exasperated Gamma right behind her, and threw herself into Streak once again. Please, Streak. I don't want to go back to my family. I thought I could go back, but they won't listen to me, she sobbed. I want to stay with you guys. That thing is out there, and they won't believe me. You did! Streak sighed again, and dropped his stern alpha aura completely. I'll take her back, he said to his packmates. Maeve continued sobbing and leaning against Streak, so he gently lifted her in his arms and cradled her caringly. Come on, kid, he said, walking out of the clearing. Maeve continued to sob, but allowed the raptor to carry her back in the direction of home. Streak nuzzled her gently and spoke. Maeve, he said, cupping a hand behind her head and looking her in the eyes. You have to go back to your family. Being away from them now is not good for anyone. If anything, being split up puts you in more danger. But I promise you that it will be okay. I will not let anything happen to you. I love you like a packmate. We all see you as one and will protect you as one. No matter what is out there, it will not ever hurt you. Maeve stifled her crying somewhat as he spoke, and then leaned against him again as Streak continued to carry her back in the direction of her family. Streak cradled her in his arms, close against his chest, for the entire trip. Katrina circled around the pond for a second time, facing the forest the whole while, shouting her sister's name out every few seconds. She'd searched the house, the area immediately around it, and each building within the clearing more than once, and Maeve was nowhere to be found. And after looking around the rest of the property, Katrina had come to the realization her sister must have gone into the woods. Not wanting to scare her mother, Katrina decided not to tell her, and was now calling out her sister's name, hoping to guide her home if she'd gotten lost. Maeve! Katrina shouted, taking a few steps closer to the tree line than she had previously. Sis! Where are you? She called, cupping her hands to her mouth. Maeve! She all but screamed. She lowered her hands and heard no sound, other than her fading echo and the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. She was about to call out again, contemplating going into the woods herself, when she heard something out of sight, rushing towards her from deep in the woods. Going wide-eyed, Katrina took a few steps back as the unseen thing picked up speed. It sounded big, and it was coming at her fast. Katrina was about to turn and bolt when her brother sprinted out of the forest, collapsing onto his knees, clutching his gun like his life depended on it, looking about ready to pass out. Katrina rushed forward and grabbed him, preventing Nolan from falling flat on his face. What the hell happened to you? She gasped. Nolan took multiple deep breaths for several seconds before he managed to start talking. I was tracking a deer when I felt like I was being watched, he explained, coughing. I saw this thing standing in the woods and shot it, but it vanished before I got to it. But I left these big footprints and I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. He whimpered, shaking, panicked. And what's more, on my way back, I found that Gojirasaurus, the one that was outside the house the other night. Something had killed it, gutted it. It was cut open and hollowed out. Its innards and organs were strung all over the trees like some sick Christmas decorations. It wasn't the outcome of some feeding frenzy. It was clearly done intentionally by something intelligent. Katrina stared at her brother, wide-eyed, and she looked up into the trees. Okay, come on, let's get you back up to the house, she said, helping her brother stand up. She then paused. Shit, she softly gasped. I think Maeve's out there. Nolan looked at his sister in disbelief, and then looked at the tree line. Oh, fuck, he whispered, also going wide-eyes. I gotta go look for her, he said, pushing his panic aside and making like he was about to walk back into the forest. Katrina stopped him. You can barely stand. I think you're in a little bit of shock. Come on, you can't go back out there in this state. Maybe Dad will find her. That's all we can do right now, she said, steering Nolan towards the house. And not a word of this to Mom, okay? Not of Maeve missing, and not about what you saw. Just say some Dilophosaurus spooked you while chasing a rabbit or something, and that's what's got you all shook up. Okay, Nolan agreed, still breathing hard and shaking. But I am telling you, there is something in that forest that shouldn't be there. They got to the house, and Nolan was about ready to faint. Katrina laid him on the couch and sprinted for the back door. Kalani was on the other side of the house, a short distance from the back door, just finishing hanging the laundry on the line, distracting herself from her worries and fear that her worst nightmare, a serious danger to her children, might have been on the cusp of reality. She just hung the last shirt and picked up her basket when Katrina came busting out of the back door of the house, shouting, "Mom!" at the top of her lungs. She waved her mother to the house, and Kalani dropped the basket and ran towards the door. That night, the mood in the cabin was tense. The shared atmosphere between the family was dark, even though everyone was home safely. Nolan took his father aside after another wordless supper. The fish again tasted less than desirable, and had a hushed conversation in the hallway, where he explained what he had found and what state the Gujirosaurus was in. I haven't told Mom yet, because she's already stressed, and I didn't want to scare her, Nolan was saying, but his father raised a hand and cut him off. Good thinking, Adam said, keeping his voice low. He placed his hands on his son's shoulders reassuringly. I'll break the news to her later. You go get some rest. I can tell you need it. And we'll go check that out first thing in the morning. Adam helped Kalani settle down into bed later that night, and he pulled the covers over her gently, before walking over to his side of the room to get changed. My running off was our fault, Kalani said. We should have listened to her last night. After seeing those drawings, I think she knew what she saw. Adam nodded, sighing slightly, staring at the windowless wall. He was beyond grateful that she hadn't encountered anything out in the forest, especially after what had happened to him out there. As an isolated incident, I wouldn't be too worried, Adam said after a few seconds, turning to face his wife, seeing the worry in her eyes reflecting in the lantern light. Especially after seeing nothing last night myself. But there's been weird things happening for days now. The fishing rod being bitten clean in half, the weird dinosaur I saw, what Maeve saw at her window, the thing I saw on the game camera, and what Nolan found in the woods. What did Nolan find? Kalani softly asked. Adam looked at her. While he was out hunting, it wasn't a Dilophosaurus that scared him. He saw something watching him, thought it was following him, and then he found that Gujirosaurus that was stalking around outside the house the other night. Something had not only killed it, but apparently had cut it open and strewn its innards out in the tree branches. He said it was like it was left for us to find, he explained. Kalani's eyes went wide with fright, and she began breathing rapidly. Oh, Adam. It's like we're in one of those stupid horror movies we used to go see on late nights as kids when we had nothing better to do, Kalani said, tears welling up in her eyes as she tried to slow her breathing. Adam rushed to her side to comfort her. Now, listen. Listen to me. You said he was in a state of shock when he got back. Maybe he didn't see what he thought he did, Adam whispered, though he didn't believe his words. We're going out there tomorrow to have a look. And what if you do find exactly what he described? Kalani asked. Well, then the meaning is clear. Something doesn't want us here, or something just wants to scare us. Whatever it is, it's watching us. If we decide it's a threat, then maybe we pack what we need, what we want to keep, and set out. Set out into the world, on the road, try to find a new place, or maybe other people who are good. Even after what those people did to you, you want to find others? Yeah, if we find good ones. It's a wide world out there. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, okay? Adam said, looking his wife in the eyes. Maybe we're all jumping to conclusions and none of this is connected. Could it all just be a series of coincidences and we're scaring ourselves? We'll find out more tomorrow when Nolan and I go out there. Then I'll check the other cameras I set up around the area this afternoon. There's even 2 I aimed at the house. If anything comes near in the night, we'll know. I'm not going to let anything happen to any of you. I promise. He sat down on the bed at Kalani's side, taking her hand. Leaving isn't the option I want. We've made our lives here. It's home, and safer than most places. Our kids were born here. They grew up here. And I don't want to tear it away from them. Kalani nodded. It is, she agreed. Home. Adam sighed, looking down again. He then reached out to a drawer at the bedside table and pulled out a map. Tomorrow, I want you to study this. If we decide we need to go, if we're truly not safe here, then we need to have a destination. It's a big world. We can't just wander around without some place in mind. Kalani began chewing a fingernail. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Adam leaned forward and kissed her on the lips gently. It won't. We will figure this out, he vowed. Again, I'm willing to tear down the whole forest to keep you all safe. With that, he reached over and doused the lantern flame. To be continued. The Monster, an original post-apocalyptic story read by the author. So, even though I said in Followed it would be the last video to follow this plot, I decided to do one more to end this narration story with the tension and the rising action at its highest point. To see how it all goes down in the 3rd act when version 2 finally attacks, be sure to check out the book when it releases. I love horror, especially a nice, slow-burning horror story, and my novella, version 2, is my first attempt at writing a full book in the genre. And even though the whole series, the Spinosaurus, is named after Spino because he was the first character I made for the story, version 2 is my favorite character. And I wanted to give him his own story where he can be the star and have a chance to just be scary. You know, I think he's a very scary antagonist, and he's only in the first book in a very minor role. and I wanted to expand his character, and the novella spin-off is the book that resulted. Followed, the one that preceded this, was one of, if not my favorite audio story videos I've done yet. Again, I love horror, and that one was, I think, the most scary one I've done. And when I say I love horror, I'm not kidding. My coworker literally bought me she knows this, and she literally bought me a blanket and pillow that says, I love horror, and it has like all the most famous horror movie mascots. So, I love horror. Now, originally, the Hybrid Part 2 would have been the end of Wave 3 of narrations, but I decided to add this video on to cap off Wave 3 instead because the deputy had to be completely pushed back from Wave 3 to Wave 4. And this was my way of giving you one last story for the current wave to make up for it. Like the bonus episodes The Walking Dead did in Season 10. You know, a fun way to give you more, even though some stuff was delayed. You know, Here's Negan made those bonus episodes worth it, and I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed this bonus narration at the end of Wave 3. And if you want to listen to more, there's a chronological playlist linked below that has all the narrations in the order they occur. So with this, Wave 3 is over. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to listen to my other audio stories, like and subscribe, and check out my other content. Aside from narrations, I also make gaming content, and I just released a documentary about the history of the Loch Ness Monster, and people really seemed to enjoy that. And I've got a new mini documentary in the planning stage. That one will be short, it's not going to be another full-length one, but I think it'll be an interesting story, and I've never seen anyone cover it before. So, with that cryptic teaser, I'll end this off now. So please check out some of my other content, and thank you for listening.